Jam-packed weekend for mixed martial arts as three major organizations held event this weekend: Invicta FC, World Series of Fighting, and of course the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Starting first in order, Invicta FC 18 was in Kansas City this past weekend, Friday, and looking over the main card, not the most stacked main card for Invicta, but with one without a title fight, still pretty solid as 8 fights were shown on the exclusive Fight Pass streaming organization. Some of the fights I'd like to highlight is Aspen Ladd against Jessica Hoy. She had a very nice performance, especially following up her last win over Kelly McGill. Able to follow that up with a very dominant victory over Jessica Hoy, who was much taller and much bigger than Aspen Ladd, but that did not seem to matter as Ladd was able to really dictate the pace of this fight, was really moving forward a lot. Hoy wasn't really able to counter much, and Ladd was really in her face, especially with jabs. Eventually in the second round, Ladd was able to get a takedown, get on top, I believe got back mount on an occasion as well, and was just landed down blows, and eventually the referee, Mike England, had to step in the second round at 3:14 for Aspen Ladd to get another victory. Very nice win for Aspen there. Also, Megan Anderson continues to roll as she just put an absolute whooping on Peggy Morgan, once again collecting another first-round knockout, finished 409 in the first round, and Peggy Morgan really never had much of a chance or much offense in this fight, as Megan Anderson was pretty much able to dictate the pace of this fight right from the start, landing big power punches. If you saw some pictures online, Peggy Morgan's jaw and cheek area was definitely swollen. Maybe had a broken jaw. It definitely got hurt. Maybe broken teeth or something. I don't know. Megan Anderson was hitting her really hard, and eventually, again, she succumbed to punches in the first round, 409. After the fights, asked by Laura Sanko there inside the Invicta cage who she would like to take on next, if Cyborg is indeed next for her. She didn't seem really to care much who she fought next. I think there aren't that many options for Invicta to feed Cyborg. So if that's next, that's what's next. I wouldn't be opposed to a Megan Anderson Charmaine Tweet fight, but it all depends kind of on Cyborg a little bit, because of course she already did that one off fight for the UFC at a catch weight of 140. So if that is still in the works, would that come up first before another Invicta defense? Or also, how many more events is Invicta planning on doing this year? If they're only planning, I mean, I know it's August, but if they're only planning on doing one more event, I would try to make that event loaded, and having Cyborg Santos fight somebody on it, I think might be a necessity. So, kind of depends on the Invicta matchmaking and what Cyborg really wants to do next, because she should be ready to go after that first round finish there of Leslie Smith back in May. Cindy Danoy, oh boy, against Jessamine Duke, and Jessamine Duke just continues to struggle regardless of what organization she fights for. And this time against Cindy, who has a win over the aforementioned Megan Anderson at 135. What a grappling expert, and definitely a solid veteran. And against Duke, was able to get to the fight to the ground quickly, was kind of holding a bit of a head and arm triangle kind of choke, and all of a sudden you just see Jessamine Duke tapping as Cindy was throwing some punches her way. And it was really weird because it didn't look like Cindy was really trying for a submission. It was kind of more of holding the headlock and throwing punches, and then she tapped, and that was it. Apparently on Sheerdog it listed as a scarf hold arm lock, which I'm not sure if I've ever seen listed before. And it worked as a submission, but I don't think that's really what she was trying for. And I think with submission like that, and obviously win over Megan Anderson in another division, I think that warrants a shot at Tanya Evinger for the Invicta Bantamweight Championship. I mean, that's pretty impressive, and there aren't that many girls at 135, and Invicta hasn't given up to the UFC already, so I think that's a matchup definitely that should be booked for the future. Also, Mizuki had a very impressive bounce-back win as she was able to take out Lynn Alvarez pretty handily in the second round via armbar at the 3-minute marker. First round really dictated the pace with her striking and didn't really allow Alvarez to breathe much. And in the second round was able to land a takedown, get good position, get another armbar. And since having a tough start to her Invicta career, losing to top fighters Carolina Kowalkiewicz as well as Alexa Grasso. Of course, Carolina is now in the UFC, poised on fighting for the UFC title. Grasso was just in the main event, who we'll get to in just a second, but obviously one of the top fighters in Invicta in any organization. But since then, she has rattled off 4 consecutive victories, 2 inside the Invicta cage, 2 back in her native home in Japan for the Deep Jewels events at Jewels 9 and Jewels 11. And of those 4 victories, 3 have come by way of armbar submission to now run her record 12-4. And I think Grasso probably gets the title shot there against Angela Hill. That would be my guess. I think if Mizuki can win one more fight. Actually, Mizuki had a win over Beck Rollins back at Invicta 6 in 2013, but then it wasn't until she fought Carolina in November of 2014 as she returned. She took another 3 fights there inside of Deep Jewels. So so far in Invicta, and also in Jewels, she defeated Alex Chambers, who's currently in the UFC as well. So if she doesn't get signed by the UFC, it's crazy to think she's already fought 16 times. She's just 21 years old. Maybe take one more fight in Invicta and then possibly get a rematch against Grasso or fight Angela Hill. So definitely a good performance by her. And speaking of good performances, girl she lost to, Alexa Grasso, her first fight in quite a while in any organization, let alone Invictus. She's had a kind of a host of problems injury-wise since defeating Mizuki back in February of 2015. She finally returned to the Invicta cage, defeating tough fighter Jody Iscabel, and just put on a clinic, especially rounds 1 and 3. Round 2 probably still would have gave to Alexa, but it seemed like in that round maybe you could tell maybe the adrenaline just took a hit there. Jody was able to recover a little bit, and then round 3 Alexa went back to damage. And really most of the damage to me was done by Jody trying to force the action, really moving to get either punches inside or look for takedowns, and Alexa did a great job of stopping those takedowns and really countering with damage inside the clinch, and it didn't really seem like Jody had much of an answer. And when it was at range, again, Jody being the shorter and reach disadvantaged fighter, had trouble really landing strikes on the outside where Alexa was able to do that. And again, she was really trying to rush her way inside to make it a dirty fight, but Grasso was ready for it and just hit Jody with damage at really every step of the way. The few times it did go to the ground with Grasso on her back, it didn't stay for very long, and Grasso did threaten with a couple of submissions during this fight as well, and very well-deserved unanimous decision victory for Alexa, who really, besides that second round, that was the only round that looked like she was showing any signs of cage rust at all. Otherwise, I thought she performed very well, and like I said, with the win already over Mizuki, and so far undefeated in her career, I think she most likely gets a shot there at Angela Hill for the Invicta strawweight title, if she doesn't outright just move to the UFC, which could be a possibility as well. So that was Invicta FC 18. Again, that was on the UFC Fight Pass Friday night, July 29th in Kansas City. We'll move from that to Saturday night, World Series of Fighting 32 that took place pretty much simultaneously for UFC 201. Looking over this card, first bout was veteran Lewis Taylor as he took on a newcomer to the sport and top prospect there from the Black Zillions in Phil Hawes. 4-0 coming into this fight. He had won his previous fight there in World Series of Fighting back in June at World Series of Fighting 31, knocking out Joshua Key in the first round. Now taking on Taylor, who had a little more prestige, was 12-3 coming into this fight, now 13-3, 37 years old, had been around for a while, and has fought for several organizations like Strikeforce, Bellator, Titan, and now World Series of Fighting. Won his last fight in World Series of Fighting in the first round as well. And coming into this fight, obviously, despite the veteran nature of Taylor, not too many people probably were giving him a chance against the rising star that is Phil Hawes. And it was Taylor stayed in there, probably lost the first round there, as Hawes was definitely pushing the pace, landing some nice shots, but Taylor was able to eat him. Never got hit with anything too hard, not anything that really rocked him or really took him out of the round, but he definitely lost it. And then in round two, kind of reminded me of a couple weeks ago with Darian Caldwell against Joe Manglo. Simply Phil Hawes shot in, head right there to the side. Lewis Taylor went for the guillotine hard and got it. I mean, as simple as that. And only his fifth professional fight for Phil Hawes. I'm sure he'll be back, but that was just kind of just a rookie mistake move. And he went up against a veteran that saw that opportunity immediately, went for it, and got it. And I don't think that means that Phil Hawes is bad or he's not going to have a good career now or anything, or he's washed up or there was no deserved hype around him or anything like that. Just simply he got caught, and that's what happens in this game. I think everybody at some point in their career gets caught, does a little thing that seems mundane or routine, and ends up costing him the fight. And that's what happened here to Phil Hawes against Lewis Taylor. The next matchup of the evening was the highly hyped Fodor versus Fodor matchup, as adopted brothers Carlos Fodor and Ben Fodor did battle inside the World Series of Fighting cage. At one time, these two were like brothers, best friends, and somehow the last couple of months things have deteriorated between the two. Haven't really heard why, really, just the fact that it's not good between them two. At one point, Ben Fodor, a.k.a. Phoenix Jones, the vigilante superhero there for Seattle, was even barred from coming to the gym there while Carlos was training. People in the family and their friends and stuff didn't want them to fight, but I guess they decided to do this, so they signed the fight contract there. And Carlos, despite being the smaller guy, normally fighting at 155 pounds, with Ben normally fighting at 170, they fought at a catch weight. I think it was 160 something. I think it might have been like 168 or something like that. And despite that, Ben Fodor, who, if you've seen him in his World Series of Fighting fight, definitely an exciting guy, but definitely known for being a stand-up fighter. That's really what he likes to do. He doesn't have the greatest takedown defense. He's not really great off his back. And Carlos, probably knowing his adoptive brother very well, knew what area to take Ben to and took him to the ground immediately and was able to hold him there for pretty much the majority of the fight. There were few brief moments that Ben tried to get some offense going, and it didn't really work out. He pretty much was held there for 15 minutes, and not too unexpected, but it was a little unexpected that the smaller guy giving up, 20, 30 pounds in Carlos, that he was able to really just outmaneuver him so well and for so long. So credit to Carlos, but it looks as though this fight has not extinguished the rivalry between these two. I don't know if this relationship will ever be repaired, and I'm not sure how this affects either gentleman moving forward with their mixed martial arts careers. It's neat in the sense that something like this happened, I guess, because you don't see stuff like this happen too often, but it's unfortunate, regardless whether these guys are adopted brothers or biological brothers, to have a relationship deteriorate that they felt like they had to fight each other inside a cage for money. And I will say that's unfortunate. And regardless of how the fight went, regardless of who won, how exciting it was, it sucks that, again, those two gentlemen had to come to this. And for World Series of Fighting, I don't mind them capitalizing it. I mean, if it came to the point where both of them are willing to fight each other in the cage, who cares what organization it is? And I can't really say anything about World Series of Fighting, who really has shied away from freak show type stuff in their organization. This is something that's usually right up Bellator's alley, and not a World Series of Fighting. So I give them some credit. I guess they finally like, hey, other organizations have done it. I mean, you know, the UFC's done it. They haven't been shy of doing that. I mean, they had the one-off fight there with Brock Lesnar. They brought in James Toney to fight Randy Couture. So even the UFC has not been shy of the freak show element of things. And World Series of Fighting, I guess somewhat to their credit, really has not done that. So this is the first thing you could maybe say that. And while it was promoted, it wasn't the main event. It wasn't the co-main event. I mean, it wasn't going to overshadow Marlon Moraes. It wasn't going to overshadow Lance Palmer against Almeida. And while, yes, the fight was in Washington and it had a lot of buzz because of the local ties, I think other than that, not too many people cared. If you really didn't know the story, and you don't really even know much about Phoenix Jones, Carlos Ford was not really that well known of a name. Maybe you didn't care. And then because the fight wasn't that exciting, maybe you tuned out and waited to the co-main event. Of course, maybe you were probably watching UFC 201. So it was an interesting situation, and I don't know what the unsuccess of this. I wouldn't be surprised we don't see World Series of Fighting kind of go back to stuff like this, at least in the near future. No pun intended, because that's Carlos Forder's nickname. Looking at the co-main events of the evening, Lance Palmer against Alex Almeida ended up going down as a majority decision. One judge scoring this a draw, the other two judges scoring in favor of Lance Palmer, with one judge scoring at 49-46 and the other judge scoring at 50-45. And I don't know how those other two judges scored it 5 rounds to none and 4 rounds to 1 for Lance Palmer. I was pretty fed up with that decision after watching this bout. I thought it went very similar to the way their first bout went, with Lance Palmer not being able to get inside, Almeida being able to keep him at range, mainly with his leg kicks, especially that inside leg kick to Lance Palmer. Palmer had 1 or 2 overhand rights that were able to land inside a rush, landed maybe 1 or 2 takedowns, but I think the first round was the only round I would say that he was on for a significant amount of time, and during that time period, he was definitely getting threatened with submissions. And that round, the first round, I think could have easily been called a 9-9, or I probably would have scored it for Almeida, because even though he got taken down, the threat of the submissions added with, I think he was maybe slightly getting the better on the feet, I probably would have gave that first round to Almeida. Rounds 2 and 3 to me were definitely all Almeida. That inside leg kick was nasty there, and then I believe in the third round is when Almeida dropped Lance Palmer. That's another reason why I object to that 50-45, because to me that was the most significant strike landed this whole entire fight was in that third round, and it was from Almeida. So I don't see how Palmer gets that round at all. I really don't. So at that point in the fight, it's either 3-0 Almeida or 2-1 Almeida, depending on how you scored it. Rounds 4 and 5, I have to admit, were pretty close. I didn't think too much significant action happened in those 2 frames. You could really make a case that either guy took both rounds or lost both rounds. I really do. I probably would have split rounds 4 and 5. I think I would have gave Almeida 4 and Palmer 5. So by my count, it either would have been 3-2 Almeida or 3 rounds Almeida, 1 Palmer with 1-9-9. And the one judge scored it a 48-48, which I think is very apt, because if you gave round 1 9-9, you gave 2 and 3 to Almeida and 4 and 5 to Palmer, boom, there's your draw, 48-48. I can kind of get behind that. I really can. But the 5 rounds to none and 4 rounds to 1 for Palmer, I don't see it, because I don't see how he won 4 rounds. Even if you give him 1, 4, and 5, that's 3. That's a 48-47 win. So I don't know where they're getting 4 rounds for Lance Palmer. I really don't, because I could at most only come up with 4 for Almeida, and I would, like I said, I probably would have scored the first round 9-9, which likely leaves at 3 for Almeida. So I don't know. I thought it was a bad decision. So Palmer gets the title back. I gotta imagine, I don't know if the next fight will instantly be Almeida, because that means they would fight each other 3 times in a row. I mean, they haven't been that great of fights that I don't know, but I don't know. I didn't even think an immediate rematch was deserved after the first time. I thought Almeida beat Palmer pretty soundly that first time. So I think each other will at least take a step away. I think Almeida should fight at least somebody else just to not fight Lance Palmer and vice versa. And then maybe we get to see Palmer Almeida 3. But I thought the judging was not great for this fight there in Washington. Looking at the main event, Marlon Moraes against Josh Hill, another rematch. This time, this one is for the World Series of Fighting Bantamweight Championship, much like it was the first time. And Moraes, unlike the first time, didn't really mess around with Hill too much, as he was able to take out the Canadian in the second round with a perfectly planted head kick that sent Josh Hill crashing to the canvas. A couple more punches thrown in before referee Steve Newport had to come in to stop this one 38 seconds into the second round. And pretty much what I expected. I found it hard to believe that that Marlon Moraes would go another 25 minutes with Josh Hill. Not to take anything away from Josh Hill the first time around, but I think Marlon was really toying with him the first round and was not doing anything crazy to overextend himself and get caught or get hurt or have some type of fluke thing affect his winning streak and obviously him losing his title. And I think this time around, not to say he was getting reckless, but I think he kind of realized, like, all right, I can't go to another 5-round decision with this guy. I got to take this guy out. And that's what he did. That's exactly what he did, taking this guy out in the second round. And he has now lost since Ring of Combat 38 in November of 2011. And actually that year he lost twice. Also lost to Ralph Acosta back at World Extreme Fighting 46. That was in April of this year. And actually both his losses have come back-to-back, which is weird. In 2008, he lost back-to-back fights in Shooter, Brazil. So since then, he has been nothing short of fantastic, and he's beaten some great names like Miguel Torres, Tyson Am, Carson Beebe, Cody Bollinger along the way. And I don't know what else World Series of Fighting can offer him. It looks as though his contract is coming up with the organization. I don't know what type of matching or if they have any sort of restricted status, I should say, for Marlon moving on to another organization. But from what I heard, I saw a report on Twitter. I was talking back and forth with someone. It looks as though, according to the Washington Commission, Marlon Moraes was paid about $150,000 for this fight. Now, if he moves on to the UFC or even Bellator, I don't think he would make that money up front for one fight, even with a win and a show. He probably would be making, I'd say, 50-50. I want to say the guy talking to mentioned Will Brooks, a Bellator champion, was given a contract around 50 and 50, 50 to show, 50 to win for his first couple of fights inside the organization, and I think that's probably about spot on. And I think for Moraes, because of his status outside the organization and just the way he has dominated people and shot up the bantamweight rankings there, I would think that I was talking to Jason Floyd, who runs the MMA Report podcast as well as the Radio Influence website and podcasting network. So that's, I would say, a pretty credible source. You can follow him on Twitter at Jason_Floyd. So I think for Marlon, you might lose a little money up front, but obviously you're going to make a lot more money potentially long-term fighting with the Ultimate Fighting Championship as opposed to fighting for World Series of Fighting. And not to mention, you know, he's not super old, but he is 28. He's already fought over 20 times professionally. World Series of Fighting is no longer offering him that challenge of fight. Don't you want to test yourself? I mean, one of the guys you train with is Frankie Edgar, UFC champion. Edson Barboza, on the cusp of becoming a UFC champion. Eddie Alvarez has now done some training there in New Jersey. Now a UFC champion, was a Bellator champion. So if you want to taste success and fight high-level competition, I think he has to move on to the UFC. Now, I think Bellator obviously should throw their hat in the market because they have a great bantamweight division. I think he would be an excellent division and would make some very excellent fights. Now, Bellator may have to throw a lot more money up front on him just to contemplate him leaving World Series of Fighting, but I do think there's bigger fights even for him in Bellator than World Series of Fighting. But I think ultimately he should sign with the UFC because I feel he can win 2 fights and fight for the title. I really do. I think he can compete instantly in the top 10 of the UFC's bantamweight division. I don't know if he could beat Dominic Cruz. So far, no one has been able to beat Dominic Cruz as of late, even with his injury layoff and whatnot. So that to me don't matter, but I think he can compete with Asunciao and Dillashaw and Caraway and Sterling and Almeida and Gambron. I really think he can. And I think he can beat 2 of those guys and get a title shot. I really do. So I think for Marlon, it's really whether or not he wants to continue fighting mediocre talent for maybe a little more money up front, or take a little less to start, fight better talent with a potential more long-term payouts. UFC 201 was this past Saturday in Atlanta, Georgia, July 30th at Phillips Arena. First fight in Atlanta since UFC 143, Jones versus Evans. Looking over the 5-fight main card for UFC 201, kicked off in the flyweight division as injury replacement Ryan Benoit took on Freddie Serrano. And what a bizarre, awesome, crazy, boring fight here between Benoit and Serrano. One of the more interesting fights I have seen in the UFC. And first round, Serrano was able to land a couple of takedowns, but I thought Benoit hit him with some hard shots and probably would have took that first round. I didn't think Serrano did much with the damage in that first round. In round 2, Serrano had that really big slam in which that he cut his own head open from slamming his head on the canvas from picking up Benoit. Landed 2 of 6 takedowns there, probably would have gave him that. Round 3, Serrano once again trying hard for the takedown. Did land 1, didn't do much with it. Striking was even, both landed 21 strikes. Third round, kind of could have went either way. I probably would have gave it to Benoit, and 2 of the judges did, giving it a split decision victory for Benoit, who comes in on 10-day notice. And it was just a bizarre fight. Serrano tried some axe kicks. He tried a cartwheel roll-through kick thing at one point. Had a couple of big slams, but I don't know. It was just a bizarre fight. It was a weird choice to have this move up to the main card once the whole Justin Scoggins, Ian McCall thing went down. Yeah, just a bizarre fight, and that, unfortunately for me, was the only main card prediction that I got right. And yeah, that one I kind of just picked on a whim just because I heard of Benoit before and picked him. But yeah, pretty bizarre. And also, speaking of bizarre, there was a draw on the card as one of the Fight Pass fights, Michael Graves against Bohan Bihalovic, ended in a draw. I thought Graves had that kind of handily, at least 2 rounds to 1, even if he would have scored 1 round of 9-9, but ended up going down as a majority draw. I think one judge did have it scored for Graves, and the other 2 had it tied there at 28-28. Also on the Fight Pass, Damian Brown had a very nice performance and knockout victory over Cesar Arzamendia, and nice performance by him. Wilson Hayes take on late replacement Hector Sandoval, who had a couple weeks' notice. The guy's a top 10 flyweight, was able to take out Sandoval pretty easily, first round submission. Also, Anthony Hamilton against Damian Gabrowski, 2 just big, huge dudes. Whoever landed first probably was going to get the victory. It happened to be Anthony Hamilton to get the win in one of the fastest UFC fights. I think they said the fastest heavyweight finish at just 14 seconds for Anthony Hamilton, so very nice performance there. I thought could have got a performance of the night bonus, but did not. That went to all the people fighting there on the main card. I'll get to in a second. Ross Pearson moving up to welterweight, but taking on Masvidal, again, who is basically a lightweight, bulked up to welterweight. So Pearson just a little slower to the get. I'm sure having fought that'd be less than a month ago, I'm sure had something to do with it, despite not taking that much damage in the Will Brooks fight. Just seemed just a little slow to punch. Masvidal, obviously more time to prepare for a fight and calm down. I don't know. I think he was just a fresher fighter, and having not fought since November, and I think that showed a little bit in this matchup, and he was able to get the victory. Obviously, rocked Pearson hard in that second round. Pearson was able to recover, but yeah, just wasn't really able to do much against Masvidal in this matchup. And speaking of big performances, Good obviously gave a performance to Nikita Krylov, who looked really sharp against Ed Herman. And Herman had a couple of moments, but Krylov definitely showing that he is an emerging threat here in the light heavyweight division. I think it's time for him to take on some top competition in this division. And after knocking out a tough veteran like Ed Herman like that, I think it's deservingly so. And definitely a guy, one of the few younger guys in this light heavyweight division, and I think definitely he can make some noise there. All right, getting back to the main card now. Eric Perez against Francisco Rivera. Definitely a scrap. Knew it was going to be a crazy fight between these two. The first round, I thought Rivera did a really good job. He kept composed. He really wasn't over-rushing things. He was landing a nice counter left hook for most of the round. He stopped Perez one takedown attempt. Was being very efficient with his strikes, which isn't normally Francisco Rivera's MO. Then in round two, it seemed like Perez was able to kind of figure out the counter, figure out the range and timing. I thought did a better job of moving in and out. He also mixed up a takedown in the category, outstriking Rivera 28-20. I thought secured that round. Then in round three, both dudes, I don't know if it was a mutual agreement or Rivera was just kind of like, screw it, I'm going to go into crazy mode. I haven't done it yet this fight. As these dudes just came out swinging crazy for about the first 15-30 seconds. And at one point, Rivera was throwing punches so hard that he actually fell down from throwing punches too hard and missing at Eric Perez. And from that point in time, Perez was able to then capitalize on it, get the fight back to ground, back with him being on top like he did in round number two, was able to stay there for just about the majority of the round, outstriking Rivera 98-16, and to me secured the victory in that round. Overall, outstriking Rivera 147-59. And this was a very nice win for Eric Perez. Hadn't fought since November. I would say the best guy that he's beaten so far in the UFC. And while his last fight was a win, it wasn't over that highly touted of a guy. It wasn't that amazing a performance, despite being in his home country. So I think taking on a guy with the power, the unpredictability of Francisco Rivera is a good step in the right direction for Eric Perez, a guy that kind of got a little sidetracked with injuries, and at one time was the hot prospect in this division. But I think beating Rivera is a really good step for him. He's training with the fellas there at Alliance, was a very good camp. Of course, the champion of the division, Dominic Cruz, in the bantamweight division, is a good guy to train with regardless of what division you're fighting at. So I think training with those guys and beating Guy Rivera, I think that's going to give him a lot of confidence moving forward, because if anyone remembers his fight against Brian Caraway, he was winning that fight before he, for some reason, shot in for a takedown and got on Caraway, got careless, and got caught in a submission. So this is a guy that I think can compete with the top fighters in this division. And this win here, to me, kind of cements that he can be a force to be reckoned with in this division. Moving on to the next fight of the evening. It was in the welterweight division as Jake Ellenberger took on Mac Brown. Speaking of crazy fight, kind of expected a little bit from both sides. Jake Ellenberger was able to rush in quick, land one of those big overhand right hands that he's capable of, a lot of power behind that right hand, catches Matt Brown, follows up with some punches. Matt Brown, being the tough guy that he is, was able to recover, started to look like he was coming back. He landed a couple nice shots at Ellenberger. And then in a transition period, Ellenberger threw a awesome body kick that just hit Matt Brown right in the liver. Matt Brown just crumpled to the ground instantly. Ellenberger threw a couple more punches, and the referee, Mark Goddard, had to come in and stop this one, 146 inside of round number one. And this was a huge win for Jake Ellenberger. Definitely, to me, was a do-or-die fight. I think for either guy. Matt Brown maybe 6 around, but Jake Ellenberger, I think, definitely was going to get cut, having lost 6 of his last 7 fights coming into this matchup, taking on a top 10 welterweight in Matt Brown. The UFC gave him one more chance to see if the juggernaut was still there, and he did not disappoint, knocking out Matt Brown, and probably keeps his job maybe for another fight. And people mentioned, after Team Rain kind of disintegrated there in California, and Mark Munoz decided to move on to other aspects of his life, that Jake Ellenberger was kind of searching for different gyms. Of course, I think at one point he was with Ronda Rousey's camp there in Coach Edwin there in Glendale, California. Eventually, now he has moved on to King's MMA, which of course has guys like Fabricio Verdum, Beneil Dariush, former UFC champion Javier Dos Anjos. Of course, he mentioned a fan favorite here of Beyond the Cage and Glory kickboxer Giga Chikazi, who he credited with working on that kick. And awesome shout out there to Giga, and I hope I can give Giga some points in popularity in his career. But Giga's there as well. Fabricio Verdum, Wanderlei Silva. So that's becoming a very good camp, and I think Jeff Ellenberger finding himself there, I think will do him good. Is that the sole reason he won on Saturday night? I don't think so. Will it help him get some stability in his career? I do think so. And I think maybe learning how to adapt to the new testing rules for performance-enhancing drugs may have had more to do with that than finding the correct camp, because there are guys in that streak that he lost to that he could have beat and should have beat and didn't. So I can't hold it all to just simply having the right camp, because at the end of the day, you're the only one locked inside that cage with the other fighter. Your coaches and your friends and your family are not there with you. So at the end of the day, it's still the loss is on you, regardless of who you're coaching by or who you're getting coached by at that moment of time. And I think Jake Ellenberger, maybe getting a good camp will help him mentally more so than anything physical inside the cage. And taking on a guy like Matt Brown, who is definitely looking to come out and have a good fight and get that bad loss and experience of Brazil, even though he said it wasn't that bad. And speaking with me last week before the fight against Jake Ellenberger, I still don't think, losing the way he did and having all that fan stuff made it that great of a experience. He's a tough guy. He was shaking it off, but I gotta believe that it wasn't that great a time in Brazil. And while he said, he's older, he wanted to take a fight quick while he still had the opportunity. Yeah, I think that's part of it. But I think when you get dominated in a fight like that, and it's a fight where the other guy's going to do that. It wasn't something crazy Damian Maia did. It wasn't something uncharacteristic. He knew Damian Maia was going to come after him. And I think losses like that are more demoralizing than if you get caught, or if the guy does something crazy, or if he does something that you had no idea he was capable of. So for Matt Brown to come in there and get a loss like this, I think this one's going to hurt. And not just physically, but I think mentally, losing to Jake Ellenberger, a guy who was literally going to be cut. So I think Matt Brown, will probably stick around in the UFC. I think he probably gets one more fight because he's really only lost 2 top guys. So I think he may be given that opportunity to come back for one more. I mean, they're going to let Jake Ellenberger come back for one more. They definitely should let Matt Brown have that same option. But great win for Jake Ellenberger, and we'll see if the new camp in King's MMA and this victory can propel him back into the top 10 where he was a few years ago. Co-main event of the evening in the women's strawweight division, as Karolina Kowalkiewicz, I believe I swear they say her name different every time they come on the broadcast. She was taking on Rose Namajunas. This got the fight of the night bonus. The Ellenberger Brown was one of the performance of the bonus tonight there. Of course, deservedly so there for Jake. Looking at this fight early on, I thought Rose did a great job using her range in this fight. She mixed up a couple of takedowns, didn't do much with it, but did get to the fight to the ground twice. Towards the end of the first round, we saw Karolina able to get this fight inside a little bit, do a little damage, but I think overall I would have gave this round 1 to Rose. In round 2, Rose, maybe with being able to land the 2 takedowns, although not doing much, decided to shift the fight to the inside, and I don't know if that was her doing that or her corner telling her, you should really try to push for a takedown now. Standing with her, you may be tempting fate a little bit. And I think that was the wrong move. I think she should have stayed at range where she was having success with those long jabs and right hands, and not allowed to have Karolina come on the inside, who was obviously having difficulty landing any strike on the much taller and longer Rose. But Rose brought the fight on the inside, was getting stuffed by those takedowns, and Carolina was able to go to work inside the clinch, landing knees, landing elbows, and then was really able to keep the fight from the outside with those damaging blows. I think Rose, it sapped her strength, sapped her conditioning. Didn't look like the same Rose that fought Tisha, or even the same Rose that went 25 minutes of domination against Paige Van Zandt. And into round 3, I won't say limped, but you could definitely tell was not that fresh, was not that crisp. And I think at that point, staying at range didn't really come into the picture. It came into more so, if I can get this fight to the ground, maybe I can get a submission because I'm a better grappler than her. And I think that mindset set in, where maybe she was desperate. And again, tried for takedowns, but same thing, got countered. Had a little success at range for a little bit in round 3. But once again, Carolina has proved that she has great takedown defense. I think just about every fight the girl she has fought has really tried to take her down, especially this fight and the Randa Marcos fight. Not as much in the Heather Joe Clark fight, but great takedown defense. And if you get in the clinch against her, I don't know if there are too many people that are as good as her in that position, whether she's having you, or whether she's putting your back up against the cage, or whether her back's up against the cage. And I think that was the remarkable thing, is a lot of the damage she was doing was with her back against the cage, which is not strategically where you want to be in the octagon. And she was able to turn that into an advantage, ended up outstriking Rose 128-74, and really dominated in the output too. 293 strikes were thrown by the woman from Poland to just 149 for Namajunas. That's an incredible pace for a 15-minute fight, and was successful stopping 2 of 6 takedowns. 0 for 4 was Rose after landing those 2 initial takedowns in round 1. And I thought after a slow first round, Carolina was able to adjust and also add in, I think, a little bad tactical game plan by Rose, not sticking with what was working with her in the first round and bringing the fight in close. Really credited Carolina, who got the victory, and I think in the process probably earned her shot at her fellow countrywoman, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, for the UFC Championship later this year. Looking at the main event of the evening, Tyron Woodley against Robbie Lawler. Plain and simple, when I was doing the breakdown, I took Robbie because I thought he would be able to survive the early onslaught by Woodley, and if it got into the later rounds, to me that's where usually Robbie takes over and can cement a fight, either winning by decision or winning by knockout. But Woodley, to his credit, didn't allow Robbie Lawler to survive that early storm, as he was able to catch Robbie with his hands down in a counter, and he was able to land one of those huge right bombs that he is capable of, and he has done so several times inside the octagon. None bigger than the one he landed on Robbie Lawler, which did him in just 2:12 into the first round, allowing Tyron Woodley to become the UFC welterweight champion for the first time. And just an excellent time right hand, and that's what he's capable of. He can do that to anyone in this division at any time. And Robbie Lawler hadn't been knocked out in 10 years, even makes it more impressive that Woodley was able to defeat Robbie Lawler. After the fight, Woodley called out Nick Diaz. Some people are upset that he did that, considering Stephen Thompson has been on such a roll, knocking people out silly and dominating people, and is a guy deserving of a shot at the welterweight championship. And for Woodley, I don't think it was simply him overlooking Stephen Thompson or being afraid of Stephen Thompson or really not wanting to fight Stephen Thompson. This is Tyron Woodley seeing an opportunity to potentially cash in on a big paycheck, because a fight against Nick Diaz and the hype the Diaz brothers have got since the whole scandal with Nick Diaz being suspended for too long. Now he's free from suspension. Of course, the hype train right now that his brother's on, beating Conor McGregor once, and obviously he's fighting Conor again, could beat him twice. The Diaz brothers are a hot commodity right now. So why not call out Nick Diaz? Why not? Because that's a fight that can get him some money. Now, I'm not saying that no one would buy him against Woodley as the main event of a pay-per-view. I don't think that's the case. But casual fans would see Diaz against Woodley and may buy into that as more pay-per-view points in Woodley's pocket. I totally get it. However, I don't think that's what's going to be next for either gentleman. I think Stephen Thompson will get Tyron Woodley. I think that could be an excellent co-main event for the UFC in New York, possibly to Daniel Cormier, possibly to Conor McGregor. So, I don't know. we shall see. But I think Woodley does get Stephen Thompson next, no matter who he was calling out. I think that is the case. And for Robbie Lawler, I'm sure he'll take some time off, but he'll be right back. I don't know if he'll capture the title again. It's really tough to win a title a second time, but he's still going to be relevant. And really, it's whether this was just him simply get caught or if all those wars that Robbie Lawler's been in over the years. I mean, he's only 33 years old. He's been fighting pretty much since he was 18. He's been fighting over 10 years in the sport. And for a lot of that time, he's been fighting at a very high level. So this could be the beginning of the end, but we'll only really see if his next fight, if he goes out there and gets knocked out again in the first round. So I think Robbie Lawler is still really relevant, can easily get his title back, but this could be something that when we look back at Robbie Lawler's career, if it goes on for a few more years and he doesn't do well, that we could be like, well, this was the turning point. And really only time will tell whether or not that is correct or if this was just simply Tyron just being able to land one of those big power punches that he was capable of. Jim Graham here for Beyond the Cage. Once again, I welcome in a special guest. He is fresh off his victory over Ben Nguyen at UFC Sioux Falls. He is the last samurai, Luis Smolka. And Luis, thanks for coming on Beyond the Cage again.
Thanks, Jim. It's Luis, by the way. It's Luis. I made an Instagram post about this. Everybody's been calling me Luis, dude. Luis. I have to start making it a point.
I tried to correct myself the second time because I saw that post there, but I started calling that because that's how John Aiken and stuff was saying it. So I was like, oh, that's how you say his name. And then you're like, no, it's Luis.
Yeah, I think it's when they were doing their research on me in the Philippines, they were calling me Luis because I don't think Luis is in their language. They just called me Luis because that's how they, like in the Philippines, I guess that's just how they say it. So everybody thought that's how it was pronounced. It's actually Luis.
All right, I want to get to your fight here at UFC Sioux Falls, and looking over some of the stats here, you were able to put a whooping on Ben Nguyen, plain and simple, as you outstruck him 138-8. Do you even remember him hitting you 8 times? It seemed like it was just you hitting him.
Yeah, I don't really remember getting hit 8 times. But, I mean, it was pretty quick. It's all on fast forwards.
Now, of course, he had that kind of opening rush on you, and then after some brief grappling, he was on top for a bit. Pretty much from, I would say, about halfway around 1 till you eventually got the finish there from Mount in round 2, you pretty much just took over this fight. And did you expect to grapple as much as you did in this match, Luis?
I didn't expect him to instigate the grappling so early. I didn't expect him to want to clinch. Honestly, I had expected him to try to break away as quickly as possible on the ground or from most of the clinches, because that's kind of where my strengths are, But I guess he wanted to prove that he had something to prove, and he wanted to try to take me out, I guess at my own game. And yeah.
This is the second fight in a row where a guy has tried to take you down, looking at the Houlihan fight, and now this fight against Ben Nguyen, people thinking that's your weakness since you're such an excellent striker. And both times you have been able to turn the tables on those gentlemen and walk away with victories. With these last 2 wins, are you starting to put people on notice that you're not just a striker, you are a well-rounded mixed martial artist?
I honestly, I don't really know what my strengths are anymore, but I have a pretty extensive grappling background. I did judo, I did wrestling, and I used to grapple a lot. Me and my friends, we used to kind of settle arguments and stuff by grappling, or we would grapple, or we would fight with gloves to settle arguments and stuff. So I kind of I feel like I've been grappling it for a really, really long time, and I've done my best to figure out how this stuff works, And I just got my blue belt maybe a year or 2 ago under Ryan Lazares. So I feel like my ground is pretty good.
Now I know in this fight You obviously finished by strikes. You had a couple of chances for submissions. Did you feel as though any of those submission attempts were really close?
Yeah, I felt like a few of them were. They were pretty close, but I don't really like to go for submissions if it's gonna give up a position. I like to try to stay on top and stuff. Because just in the judge's eyes, it's better if you're on top, and attacking. So I'll go for submission attempts, but most of the time I use them to control the position. I don't really use them to finish the fight. Like, I'll go for them if they're there, but I won't. Like, I try my best to not overcommit.
Now, of course, Ben Nguyen was the hometown guy there in South Dakota. The crowd was definitely on his side coming into that fight. And do you kind of relish that opportunity once again, much like you did in your last fight against Patty, to play spoiler to the home crowd?
I don't even like doing it, man. It's just I gotta fight, I gotta eat, I gotta get paid, I got a kid, I got a mortgage, got a house, got a family to take care of. So I'll go in there and I'll fight whoever. I really don't care. It's not about being in whoever's backyard or whatever. But it would be nice to fight at home in Hawaii, or at the very least on some neutral territory. Had neutral ground. But it's what it is. I can't complain.
Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the reasons I have heard the UFC has not yet been to Hawaii is because there may be a high tax rate for them doing an event there. Does that sound correct, or am I just speaking nonsense?
I've heard so many different things. I've heard that too. I've heard the logistics of shipping everything down would be so expensive that they would need a huge show to justify cost and stuff. I've heard a whole bunch of stuff.
Now, of course, looking at yourself there training at Hawaii Elite MMA, I know one of your teammates was training Russell Doan as part of the big, International Fight Week. Unfortunately, his fight didn't go his way, but what were some of the other fights maybe from that week right before your fight there in Sioux Falls that you liked watching there?
I had a pretty good time watching all the fights of John Jacek. I really like watching her fight. She's super cool. I just like the way she strikes, man. She's so good at it. Normally I say I don't agree with girls getting paid more than me based off of what they look like and stuff. I feel kind of insulted sometimes by that. But yeah, Jan Jacek is one of those girls who deserves to get paid more. I have no problem with it, she's legitimately a badass.
Now, of course, looking here at your fight, you were ranked, I think, just outside the top 10 during the fight. Now are in the top 10 for the UFC's flyweight rankings and currently riding a 4-fight winning streak. Is there anyone in particular you would like to take on next?
Not off the top of my head, no. I guess Mighty Mouse, but that's not realistic, Fight for the belt, but I'll fight whoever. I'll fight anybody in the top 10. I don't really care. I'm just trying to get to that title, trying to get to that belt.
The upcoming season of The Ultimate Fighter is going to feature 16 flyweight champions from around the country, with the winner getting a guaranteed title shot at Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. And of course, the two coaches being top flyweight contenders, and Suhedo and Benavidez. A win over either, of course, however that works out, that could get them a title shot. Does that whole situation make you mad at all, with guys who have never fought in the UFC getting a title shot upon winning this tournament, when you've been working hard for the last couple of years to try to get that same goal?
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating, honestly. I mean, I know there's good guys outside the UFC and stuff, but it is frustrating to have these guys get fast-tracked and stuff, and I feel I feel like I'm a young rising star. I'm a contender in the division. I'm on my way up, and now they're just gonna give title shots out basically, and I'm being I feel overlooked, honestly.
Do you feel as though if you and some other top contenders who have not gotten a title shot against some regional champions may have been a better compromise?
So what do you think? So I fight some of the regional champs or whatever?
Yeah, like you and some other guys who haven't got a title shot would be like on the Ultimate Fighter. The winner still would get like the guaranteed title shot.
I guess, yeah, I could see that. That would have worked. I would have done that, like how they wanted to stick me on the show and stuff, and then like just like enter me into that tournament show thing. I would have done that, yeah. That would have been okay, I guess. But I mean, I don't know. Like they're completely, these fighters are completely untested in the UFC except for like Damasio Page and maybe Tim Elliott. But I mean, like, I don't know. I can't see it. Like, I feel like these guys they haven't competed in the UFC. They haven't competed at the highest level, and I don't know. I don't see why they deserve to just be brought in and given a title shot when other guys who have been in the organization and proved themselves are working up towards it. I guess it's all marketing and it's money and whatever, but I feel like I deserve a title shot over them, definitely.
Now, I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the happenings at UFC 201 because they had quite a few flyweight fights. Of course, there was that whole situation with Justin Scoggins not even coming close to making weight, and then kind of belittling fans on Twitter, saying that a real fighter would have, took the fight, making references to Ian McCall. What do you think about that whole situation?
That is ridiculous. He's a ridiculous person. That kid is just retarded. I don't know, man. He's stupid. Like, for him to even say that, it's, dude, you came in how far over? You couldn't let us know you weren't going to make weight? Like, this dude is like, oh, yeah, I'm 132, but, and, like, so he's only planned to make it to, like, 135, basically. He's like, oh, now I want to go up a weight. It's like, okay, well, too bad, dog, and go fight bantamweight. Weight classes are here for a reason.
Now, with Uncle Creepy, of course, not having that fight happen at 201, and you came out, of course, pretty unscathed against Ben Nguyen. Is that a fight you would like possibly next?
I'd rather not. Ian's my boy. Shit. I'd rather not, honestly. I know Wilson Hayes wants to fight him, and I want to fight Wilson Hayes, so we'll see how that goes.
Now, of course, before we got to talking here on the show, I know you were playing some video games, and I know you like to do that. And, of course, since we've talked, the UFC 2 video game has come out, and one of the first updates they did for the game, you were featured in the game for the first time in any UFC video game. And how cool is that to be able to not only have yourself be in the video game, but then being able to kind of play as yourself in a video game?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I've been putting in some work on the game. Honestly, I've been playing with like a lot of the hardcore gamers, the hardcore guys who play the game, and it's been pretty fun. It's pretty cool to play with yourself. I've been playing with myself every day.
Now, of course, another game that came out while you were there getting ready for your fight in South Dakota, of course, Pokemon Go. And I remember talking to Sam Alvey about this a couple weeks ago, and I saw some of your posts. How exciting is it to be able to play a game like that?
Oh, dude, Pokemon Go is pretty fun. Like, I don't know, I have a fun time with it. It was a great way to, like, cut some weight, like, keep moving around, like, in Sioux Falls and stuff. Like, it was a great, like, it was great to, take your mind off the fight. It was great to have that, honestly, and just kind of, like, play around. It was fun. I really liked the game.
Now, of course, how much will fighting interfere with your goal of becoming a master Pokemon trainer?
Oh, not much. I believe that you can do anything that you set your mind to, and as a great Conor McGregor once said. No, I'm just kidding. I should have researched more. I had a bit, but I don't know. Yeah. It's not a big deal. It's trading first, and then Pokemon. Second, I guess. What is it, Lucy? Sorry, my daughter's over here whining. What do you want, Mitzi?
That actually kind of will lead me to my next question here, Lewis. Of course, I believe, you can, again, correct me if I'm wrong, this was your first fight since becoming a father. So how has being a father and also being a fighter, how has that kind of changed your mentality to this game?
Um, it hasn't changed much, honestly. Like, I mean, I'm doing it for more than myself now, but I feel like I could never have been more motivated to fight. Like, I've wanted to be a UFC champion since I've known what UFC is. I wanted to be a fighter since I've known what fighting is since I could walk. Like some of my first words to my dad were play fight, play fight. I would wake him up doing that every single morning. So like, I honestly couldn't be more motivated. No matter how you look at it, I'm just, want to be a champion. And I can do it for her now.
He is Louis Smolka. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Last Samurai UFC. And Louis, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to your next fight later this year.
Thanks, Jim. I hope I do fight later this year.
UFC Fight Night 92, better known as UFC Salt Lake City, will be on Fox Sports 1 this Saturday, August 6th. It will be the first ever UFC fight in the state of Utah. 6 fights will be featured on the main card, kicking off first in the women's strawweight division, as current top 10 ranked strawweight Marina Ramos will take on newcomer Daniela Taylor. Burroughs was originally supposed to take on former Ultimate Fighter contestant Justine Kish. Once again, Kish, who has had a injury-plagued UFC tenure, only fighting once since being featured as a cast member on the Ultimate Fighter Season 20, where again she got hurt during that taping of the show. Again, kind of sucks because it looks as though she has a lot of talent. I think she showed it in that one UFC fight that she had in limited time on the Ultimate Fighter, but injuries continue to be a problem for the Australian. Danielle Taylor steps in, and looking over her record, 7-1, has looked only lost one amateur fight as well. She was, if you go back to her amateur career, 11-2, has fought mainly in King of the Cage, has captured, I believe, their championship as well. So definitely one of the better undiscovered or prospects in women's MMA. And unfortunately for her, she has to step in against Marina Moroz, who, since jumping into the UFC, has fought really nothing but tough girls and has really been able to compete with some of the best women in the UFC. I mean, her first fight was against Joanne Calderwood, who's a top 10 fighter in the division, submits her in the first round. Next fight, takes on top 10 fighter Valerie Turner, has a 3-round war with Valerie. Valerie then goes on to fight for the UFC championship. She gets kind of a unknown fighter in Christina Sanchio in her next fight, but dominates her for 15 minutes. And for Moroz, unfortunately, her fight doesn't continue with Kish, a fight that I think, despite Kish's injury status, that quality opponent really would have shot her up the rankings. But I think if Moroz is able to get by Taylor, that would give her 2 wins in a row, which doesn't sound like a lot. But if you go to that UFC graph that they put after Rose's loss, only one other girl other than the champion has a fight of 3 fights or more, and that's Carolina. So if she's able to get her second consecutive victory, that puts her along with Beck Hyatt and Joanne Calderwood as far as winning 2 consecutive fights in this division. So if she wins, that definitely to me shoots her up the rankings and puts her in a potential #1 contender fight against somebody later this year. So this is a big fight because, of course, she's expected to win now with this fight being on short notice. But I think Taylor's gonna surprise some people. I think she's gonna do a little better than people think. But I would say Moroz is probably going to be the better fighter. I think the one thing Taylor will be unpredictability. The fact that I'm not sure how much footage Moroz can get of the King of the Cage champion, and also how much time will she literally have to prepare. According to Sheerdog, it looks as though the decision to give her a new opponent was back on July 28th, so that's like less than a week, or a little more than a week. So that's not like a super long time to really prepare for somebody. So Taylor can really go in there kind of loose and whatnot. She does have some knockout power, has finished 3 of her 7 career victories by knockout. Moroz has only finished, I believe, 1 of her fights by knockout. Does have 5 submission victories. So I would say that's probably there. If I were Moroz, I would probably try to attack in the grappling department. But this one should be interesting, and obviously a big fight for Moroz, because I think with another victory, 3 out of her last 4 fights being victory in that close, hard-fought decision loss to Valerie, she definitely is going to be a factor now with Rose, at least for the foreseeable immediate title picture, is out of that, and Rose can maybe capitalize on that by beating Taylor. Next fight of the evening, Trevor Smith against Joseph Gigliotti. It looks as though I believe Gigliotti will be making his UFC debut. He is undefeated, however, in his career at 7-0. All 7 of his victories are finishes, with 3 knockouts and 4 submissions. Most recently fought for the RFA in April of this year. Now taking on Trevor Smith, known as the Hot Sauce, though I think Scott Haltzman is the real hot sauce, and I'm not saying that just because I had him on our show. Trevor Smith is 13-6 so far in his career. Has fought in the UFC a few times here, and has fought for a while though. And one thing I think will be interesting, this fight at 185 pounds, Smith, the much taller individual, he will have a 4-inch height advantage and will have a 6-inch reach advantage. And now that they're doing the leg reach measuring, he will also have a 4-inch leg reach advantage over Gigliotti. And Smith has not fought since defeating Dan Miller all the way back in July of last year at the Ultimate Fighter 21 finale there. That was the Blackzilians against American Top Team. Looking at his full UFC history, he's actually been fighting for the UFC since July of 2013, losing his very first fight to Ed Herman, which did give him a Fight of the Night honors. So far in the UFC, just 3-3, but like I said, hasn't fought for a year. But the guys he lost to, though, are definitely really good guys. I mean, he lost to Ed Herman in his first ever UFC fight. He also lost to Talas Leites, who's a top 10 middleweight. And he also lost to Chao Mahagles, who is an incredible jiu-jitsu guy as well. So while he hasn't defeated, the most crazy guys, he has beat Brian Houston, Tor Troyne, and Dan Miller, which I would say is an incredible name. And also, he did fight in Strikeforce, compiling a 2-2 record there in Strikeforce. And the 2 guys he lost to, again, tough guys, Tim Kennedy and Jean Vellante. So this guy has only lost to top guys. And while he's not a world beater or anything like that, has UFC experience, and I think added his grappling game, 9 of 13 career victories by submission. He's a veteran of the sport. He's 35 years old. This will be his 20th fight professionally, whereas looking at his opponent, Joseph Gigliotti, just 7 professional fights. This will be his 8th, his first in the UFC, just 22 years old. Obviously, not a real big guy for the middleweight division. 5'11" to 6'3", like I said, he's going to have a reach disadvantage both with the legs and the arms. He's going to have a tough going, a guy that probably should try to move down to welterweight regardless of where this fight goes. But he has some skills, Gigliotti, but I think he's going to have a tough time against a veteran like Trevor Smith. The next fight of the evening, that's going to be in the welterweight division, as Zach Cummings will take on Santiago Ponzinibbio. And Ponzinibbio, definitely a very exciting striker, likes to push the pace, likes to throw hard, likes to be aggressive. He takes chances. He can knock people out, but he's also got knocked out himself. So far in the UFC, has put up a pretty solid record of 4-2. His only losses coming to Lorenz Larkin, a top 10 welterweight, and Ryan LaFleur, who is a very excellent wrestler. He has beaten the likes of Sean Strickland, Wendell Oliveira, Andreas Stahl, and his last fight, probably his best performance so far in the octagon, knocking out the ultra-tough Court McGee back in April of this year. And Zach Cummings is one of those guys where he's not super great at any one area, but he is a veteran of the sport, 19-4 so far in his career. He knows how to fight, does have some power, but he's one of those guys that it's really tough to prepare for. He's a little awkward. He's, like I said, he's not great in any one area. It's really hard to pigeonhole him to one thing, and he's a tough dude. He works hard. He's a grinder, a guy that typically does not go out early, guy that's mentally tough, and I think a guy that, if can weather the early storm against Santiago, I think will have better conditioning, and I think will definitely be the fresher fighter heading into rounds 2 and 3, and should be an interesting fight because Santiago is probably definitely the maybe more talented individual, but Zach Cummins is definitely one of those guys that if he hangs around, he can submit, he can knock you out, he can win a decision, and I think that will make for an interesting fight. You definitely have a contrast of styles. You got more of a very aggressive and fast striker in Ponzinibbio, and you have more of a workman's-like guy there in Zach Cummins. But I think this is kind of pivotal bout for both because both are on the cusp of fighting top 15 talent, and a win over each other would definitely do well for either's career. Looking in the middleweight division, the aforementioned there, Thales Leites, who I mentioned, took on Trevor Smith. He's now taking on Chris Camozzi. Both guys are kind of on opposite streaks right now. Thales Leites, after leaving the UFC, had a really nice winning streak and really came back to the UFC, continuing that streak. As since returning to the organization in 2013, put on an impressive 5-fight winning streak, beating the likes of Tom Watson, Ed Herman, Francis Carmel, and Tim Bosch. But since that time, Leites has kind of run up against some tough competitors, taking on top 10 guys, and now current UFC middleweight champion in Michael Bisping and Gegard Mousasi, losing both decisions to those gentlemen. In my opinion, I thought he beat Michael Bisping in that 5-round fight in July of last year, but in the Mousasi one, he definitely got outclassed in that fight against Gegard. Now taking on Chris Camozzi, who is obviously maybe not quite at those gentlemen level, but definitely is a guy you have to be worried about, who I think since actually getting cut by the UFC and then returning to the organization on a short notice, taking on Jacare back in April of last year, he has won 3 straight fights, defeating Tom Watson, Joe Riggs, and Vitor Miranda, and knocking out Joe Riggs in just 26 seconds back in February, earning him one of those Performance of the Night bonus. And I think he's really just starting to put it all together. Is it good enough to beat Thales Leites? I don't know. Obviously, one of the areas Camozzi's not strong at, and obviously looking at his 2 fights against Jacare, still learning in the jiu-jitsu realm. Thales Leites is one of the best Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belts in the UFC. If he can get this fight to the ground, he has a considerable advantage over Chris Camozzi in that category. Standing up, I think both are pretty solid. Chris Camozzi, again, kind of reminds me of Zach Cummins. He's a guy that's not really technically great at any one area, but he's just a tough guy, and he hangs around. And his ability to win fights sometimes is about him being able to hang around and outwork you. And with Leites' last fight not looking that poor, this could be a fight where a guy like Chris Camozzi, a guy who really is a maximum effort type of guy and really goes out there and gives it 110% every time he steps into the octagon, that could be trouble for a guy that has had problems with conditioning, maybe the motivation of fighting a lower-ranked guy like Camozzi, not a guy up to the last 2 fights that he had in Bisping and Gegard Mousasi on a losing streak. This could be the perfect opportunity for Camozzi to upset a guy currently ranked number 12 in the UFC. So if he can get this fight to the ground, I think Thales can easily submit Camozzi. But if he keeps it standing, tries to prove to himself that he can strike with people, that he can hang, this could be an opportunity for a guy who can put a lot of output in the octagon, like Chris Camozzi, to steal a victory. Co-main event of the evening. Originally, I think it was supposed to be Cub Swanson against Kawajiri in the featherweight division. However, if you want to see that excellent matchup of 2 top 15 featherweight contenders, you're going to have to tune on to the UFC Fight Pass or have a subscription to check out that one later on, as that will be the featured Fight Pass prelim fight, only 2 featured on there. So, yeah, unfortunately, you got to go to the Fight Pass for that one. But that should be an excellent fight. I'm really looking forward to Kawajiri against Cub Swanson. Obviously, Kawajiri is a guy that if he gets on top of you, he does not let you go. And Cub Swanson is a very good striker, very slick, has some power, good hand speed, and a guy that, with the victory gets right back into top contention where he was a couple of years ago when he had that huge 6 or 7 fight winning streak. Obviously for Kawajiri, that would really solidify himself as a top 10 featherweight if he can take out a guy like Cub Swanson. Also, real quick on the FS1 prelims, no real amazing fights, but the headliner there for FS1, Court McGee, obviously going to be the hometown guy there, being born and raised in Utah and training a lot at the pit elevated in Utah for the majority of his mixed martial arts career. Definitely going to be favored against Dom Steele, who definitely, it says nonstop Ashton Pack, his nickname, but whether he's been on the winning end or the losing end, he's made his fights exciting so far in the octagon. So Dominic Steele against Court McGee should be an excellent fight, and definitely tune in that one on the FS portion of the prelims. Back to the co-main event, Dennis Bermudez against Hani Jason. Dennis Bermudez, speaking of exciting, this dude also is nonstop action, whether it's striking, whether it's grappling, whether it's in the clinch. This dude goes for it, gives you a lot of output, a lot of pressure, does not back down from a fight, keeps going. And for Bermudez, he had a tough win against Kawajiri that broke a 2-fight losing streak, losing against top guys like Jeremy Stevens and Ricardo Lamas. Now taking on Hani Jason, who, of course, burst onto the scene, winning Season 1 of the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. And after winning his first 3 fights in the UFC, has kind of fell on tough times, only going 1 win in his last 4 fights. However, his last fight against Damon Jackson ended up being ruled a no contest, but that was all the way in May of last year, and has only fought once since in the last 2 years, as he's only fought once since losing to Robbie Peralta in May of 2014. So the no contest, injuries, time away, that's a tough task to then be matched up with currently number 8 ranked Dennis Bermudez in the featherweight division. And I think Hani Jason has a chance. I think in a scramble, maybe catches Bermudez with his hand down, maybe knock him out. But I think the wrestling and overall aggressive nature of Dennis Bermudez, I think, is going to be tough for Hani Jason to overcome. Add in the layoff. I think this is a chance for Bermudez to get back on the winning track, to get 2 in a row. And I think probably, to me, unless Kawajiri wins, but if Swanson wins, I really think that if he can take out Hani Jason, I would say Dennis Bermudez is probably poised to take on Cub Swanson. I think that would be an excellent matchup coming up next if both are victorious in this fight. But for Hani Jason, it's really just, is this the same guy we remember from his 3-fight winning streak of 2013, or is this going to be the guy that we saw in 2014, 2015? Not kind of live up to the hype that he had gathered and gained on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, a guy that looks like, he's a little out of it considering the long layoff. Main event of the evening, also in the featherweight division, big night for the featherweights, is currently number 13 ranked Yair Rodriguez, the new hotness here in the featherweight division, taking on Bruce Leroy, Alex Caceres, who's coming off a very excellent performance on short notice against Cole Miller in UFC 199. I think that excellent performance, coupled in with the short notice aspect, not to mention that was his 2nd fight in a row, I believe, since moving up 245 pounds, had previously fought all of his UFC career at 135, had mixed results there, moving up, not having to cut the 10 pounds, a guy who was always very long and lanky for the UFC bantamweight division, standing at 5'10", is taking on a guy that's also very tall, very lengthy, unpredictable, liking to throw crazy strikes in the prospect there in Yair Rodriguez, who has been nothing short of fantastic since starting his tenure on the Ultimate Fighter Latin America. Has only lost 1 fight in his professional career. That was little under 3 years ago. That was in December of 2012. Since then, he has taken out everybody that has presented to him, including compiling a 4-0 UFC record. None so more fantastic as he was able to get his first finish inside the UFC, absolutely decimating Andre Fili with a jump head knee kick there to Fili, knocking him out in the 2nd round at 2:15. And that was only his 2nd career knockout, which is crazy. Was doing some training in Chicago, now doing some training at Jackson's Winklejohns as well. And for Caceres, he has switched camps and now training with the lab down there in Arizona. Of course, John Crouch, Ben Henderson, among others, they're training at the lab. Scott Holtzman, Brian Barberina, just to name a few gentlemen out there at the lab. And I think since moving to 145, I think all that unpredictability that we saw when he started on The Ultimate Fighter all those years ago. I think that's all starting to kind of take shape because he doesn't have to cut as much weight. He really doesn't have to drain himself, and I think he can do more of those crazy things that he likes to do. And Rodriguez is a very similar guy. I think the difference is the slick submissions that Bruce Leroy has. He has won almost half his fights by submission, 12-8 so far in his career. And I think he has 4 or 5 submission victories. Yeah, 5 submission victories. And he's a guy that's dangerous off his back. And that I think is an area that in a scramble or in a takedown, whether Caceres gets on top or bottom, that a young guy like Rodriguez, just 23 years old, could get caught to a guy who's been around the block here. And Caceres, 20 years old, 12-8, 20 pro fights, but has been fighting for the UFC since 2011. So this is a guy who's been fighting in the top organization for longer than Rodriguez has been a pro. So, or just about as long as Rodriguez has been in the pro. So, I think it's an interesting main event, but I think it's going to be exciting. I think we're going to see a finish, and we're going to either see a prospect break into the top 10, or we're going to see kind of a journeyman finally start to find himself and probably break into the top 15 of a very stacked division, being the featherweight division. With that said, let's get to picks here for UFC Fight Night 92. And starting first in the women's strawweight division, Danielle Taylor will take on Marini Moroz, currently ranked in the top 10 for the UFC. I think Taylor actually has a bright future here in the UFC. Looks like she had a really good run in King of the Cage, but unfortunately, such short notice against a tough girl like Marini, I think it's going to be a tough time for her, so I got to take Moroz in this one. Smith against Gigliotti. I think Gigliotti is really a welterweight. I think he's going to have a tough time against a great grappler and really big middleweight there in Trevor Smith. And I typically don't like guys on the UFC newcomer route, so I'm going to take Trevor Smith in this one. Zach Cummings against Santiago Ponzinibbio. I think Ponzinibbio is probably the more talented fighter, but I think Cummings will be able to weather that early storm, and I think he'll be able to take rounds 2 and 3 and grind out a decision victory, maybe get a submission. So I'm going to take Zach Cummings in this one. Taz Leites against Chris Camozzi. I'm going to go with the same thing. I think Chris Camozzi, I think this is ripe for an upset. He's catching Taz Leites on the down streak. I think Taz can win this fight by submission, possibly in the first round, but I think Camozzi has really stepped up his game to me since that loss to Jacare last year, and I think right now is fighting with a lot of confidence, and I think this is a prime opportunity for him to get an upset and crack into the top 15 in the UFC's middleweight division. Hani Jason against Dennis Bermudez. Hani Jason has not looked like the same guy the last year or two. Couple in, he's only fought once in the last 2 years, and he's taking on Dennis Bermudez, who's, I think, been a top guy for the last couple of years. Had hard times of late, but I think this victory puts him right back into the cusp of things of starting to go up for another run at a possible title shot. So I'm going to take the menace Dennis Bermudez to win this one. Bruce Leroy against Yair Rodriguez. I think Rodriguez is definitely super talented, but I like the veteran status there of Alex Caceres. Despite never fought in a main event before, he's been there, he's done that, and I think at 145 he's a much different animal. So I'm going to take Bruce Leroy to win this one. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Graham. I'd like to thank Louis Smolka for coming on the show earlier, talking about his win there against Ben Nguyen. And a small programming note, if some of you were wondering why I didn't ask him about his matchup there against Sergio Pettis. At the time of the interview, the announcement of him fighting Sergio Pettis had not been announced yet, so thus no questions about matchup against Sergio Pettis. But if you go back to one of my earlier interviews I did with Louis, I kind of asked him whether Sergio Pettis would be a guy who would fight, and he kind of mentioned, like, well, I don't think they're trying to have me fight prospects right now. They're trying to fight me against some higher-ranked guys because they got to build contenders for Money Mouse. And lo and behold, about a year or two later, he's fighting Sergio Pettis. So it's kind of funny. At the time I asked him, he was kind of dismissive, but now, about a year or two later, he is in fact fighting Sergio Pettis in what should be a tremendous fight coming in Portland in October. So I'm looking forward to that, and once again, we'll probably have Louis on afterwards to talk about that matchup. But again, thanks to Louis for coming on the show. I'd like to thank a couple of friends, Love MMA. If you follow them on Twitter at LUBMMA. I gave them some love on Twitter. They usually give me some love retweeting my stuff. But if you notice, during the Invicta fight, they had their logo there on Cindy Dandoy's banners, which I thought was super cool. So follow them on Twitter and check out their website there at LUBMMA. I believe it's LUBMMA.com as well. So shout out to those guys as well, and thanks for supporting me on the cage. Also, the MMA community on Twitter, MMAcommunity.com. Some of the best forums to discuss mixed martial arts and combat sports on. So go on there, sign up. They got some cool stuff that you can win right now. I think if you sign up, it's free and easy. It's quick just to talk MMA with people. And of course, I saw a couple of their people in the crowd there for World Series of Fighting. Showed them some love. They're always retweeting Beyond the Cage. So again, sign up for their forums at MMAcommunity.com. Follow them on Twitter at the MMA Community on Twitter. Also, shout out to my friend AJ Hiller, of course, running MMASignaturesUSA.com, the #1 site in the world for mixed martial arts, memorabilia, and collectibles. So head over to MMASignaturesUSA.com to check out their selection of awesome stuff. And I believe he has some Amanda Nunes stuff coming, so look out for new signed memorabilia from the new UFC champion. Also, like to thank partners at Top Rated MMA, MMAinsider.net, MMAforlife.ca. Of course, you can listen to the show right here on YouTube and subscribe, please. That's youtube.com/BeyondTheCage podcast. You can also check out the show audio-wise on iTunes as well as Google Play. We're now featured on the Google Play Store. Also, if you go on SoundCloud, I'm going to do a backup of my most recent interviews for about the last 2 months. I will have interviews on, kind of slowly adding and subtracting interviews. So if you ever miss interviews, or sometimes I'll put an interview on their early access so you get to hear it before it comes on the show here on YouTube or the other audio versions, so you can get a sneak peek at interviews by searching my name, Jim Graham, on SoundCloud and following me on SoundCloud as well. I believe it's soundcloud.com/Jim Graham, I believe, is the profile. So also you can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham and Instagram at TheJimGraham. So thanks again for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.